train, but especially narrow, is riding on narrow gauge tracks, just 3 feet across, and that inside each compartment there were 2 seats on one side of the aisle and then one on the other, and then halfway down each car they switched in order to get for balance. Now, remarkably, balance was essential in a train like this, which actually could and did occasionally tip over in a gale. So, and to me, what's so wonderful is that it shows first what a little train this is and what a big country. And that what we don't realize or appreciate now, as in our time, is how wide open the West was in the 1870s when this train went through. There was a total population in the United States of 40 million. Of that, all but 4 million lived east of the Mississippi, only 4 million west of the Mississippi. There was only one significant city in the West, that was San Francisco, and Denver, which is the only significant city in the area that we'll be talking about, had only 50,000 people. So it was a very small place, I mean, in terms of population, but a very large place in terms of landscape. And which left the big question that this book will address, which is, in a wide open country, where do you go? Where do you put your tracks? Where do you imagine the future will be? And because you have to anticipate that in order to get enough traffic to sustain your line. So that was question number one. And then question number two was, what happens when you discover that you don't have all that territory to yourself? That in fact, another rival line has come in to compete with you for it. And that is the story that I'll be telling today. And it leads obviously here to Santa Fe. So William Barstow Strong. Everybody in this story has 3 names. I love that. And they have remarkable whiskers. His, I would argue, the most remarkable of all. That's what I think of as an Old Testament beard. It goes, a good ways down his chest, and conveys something of the certainty, I believe, of his personality. This is somebody who doesn't care what other people think, that he's going to wear his beard as he likes. And the thing about Strong, there were 2 things about Strong. One is that he grew up in Vermont. He was born in Vermont, but grew up in Beloit, Wisconsin, and turned quickly to railroading as a teenager with a small line in Wisconsin, and then got picked up by the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, and in his, I would say, late 30s, and then came to the Santa Fe Railroad, the railroad of my story, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad, in his early 40s, at first as the general manager and ultimately as the president. Having said that, that is about all that is known of his personal life, beyond the fact that he had a wife and 3 kids. It's amazing that this is one of the great heroes of railroading in the 19th century. And in the archives of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad in Topeka, which fills about half of this room, that the personal details about Strong would fill just a shoebox. There is nothing that is recorded by this man. And one of the miseries and tragedies of history is that because nothing was recorded about him, he has not gotten his due. And if you want a guide to how you're going to be preserved, any of you in history, start writing stuff down now, because you want to collect as much information in written form as you can, so that historians later will be able to say that much more about you. If you don't, you will be forgotten. And that would have happened to him, but for me. But the other thing that you know about Strong is that he lived by one maxim, and he was, by the way, he was as the head of the Santa Fe during this period that I'm writing about, that he was a corporate manager. Most of the train men of the age, people like Jay Gould, were owners. They were not managers, and he was a manager not an owner. He was not a rich man. He lived on his salary. But nonetheless, he was a company man who had a very clear vision about what to do, and he acted on it in every instance. And he lived by this single maxim, which is grow or die. The answer to every question in railroading, it was build more track. And this is what he did, ultimately creating the largest railroad in the world for a certain period, 8,000 miles long. But it certainly didn't start out that way. And then we have, as his alter ego, General William Jackson Palmer. Note the mustache. That in that era, to be mostly clean shaven like that was a mark of some distinction. And notice also how well coiffed he is, and also how well dressed he is, and I would say how handsome he is. That he was said to be the best dressed man in all of Colorado, but given how few people there were in Colorado, that may not be as bold a statement as you would think. He was quite a contrast to Strong. He was, and I'll show you just why. This is him in his childhood. He was the child of a couple of Quakers in Philadelphia, and that in his youth, and in fact throughout his life, he was riven by his Quaker faith. Because as a Quaker, he was meant to be a pacifist, but as a Quaker, he was also supposed to believe fervently in the abolitionist cause. So that when the Civil War came along, that he was in absolute agony about what part of his faith to go along with. And his parents were very stern in insisting that he not fight. But he decided to fight after a long period of self-examination. And he not only, and then he threw himself into the cavalry, which was the most sort of heroic of the different bits of soldiering. And he did something